Black mail-order bride arrives to find her fiancé gone, but his brother is waiting. The train's whistle pierced the hot Arizona air as it rolled into Copper Creek Station, black smoke billowing against the cloudless blue sky. Evangeline Washington pressed her face to the dusty window, her heart hammering against her ribs as she caught her first glimpse of the small frontier town that was supposed to become her new home. The wooden platform stretched before her, weathered and sun-bleached, with a handful of people waiting in the shade of the station house. Her dark eyes searched the crowd for a familiar face. Though she'd never actually met Thomas Brennan, she'd memorized every detail of his photograph. Sandy hair, kind blue eyes, a gentle smile that had convinced her to leave everything behind in Philadelphia. As the train shuddered to a stop, Evangeline smoothed her best blue dress and adjusted her bonnet. The letter in her reticule crinkled as she stood, the careful script promising a new life, a loving husband, and a chance at happiness she'd never dared dream of as a seamstress in the city. "Copper Creek, end of the line," the conductor called out. Taking a deep breath, Evangeline gathered her small carpet bag and made her way down the narrow aisle. The Arizona heat hit her like a physical blow as she stepped onto the platform, so different from the humid summers back east. She set down her bag and looked around expectantly, waiting for Thomas to approach. Minutes ticked by. The other passengers dispersed, collected by family members or heading toward the town's main street. Soon, Evangeline stood alone on the platform except for a tall man leaning against the station house wall, his hat pulled low over his face. He pushed off from the wall and walked toward her with long, confident strides. As he drew closer, Evangeline could see he was nothing like Thomas's photograph. This man was taller, broader through the shoulders, with sun-darkened skin and coal-black hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His eyes, when he lifted his head to look at her, were not the gentle blue of her intended, but a startling green that seemed to see right through her. "You must be Miss Washington," he said, his voice deeper and rougher than she'd expected. "I'm Marcus Brennan." "Brennan?" Evangeline's heart skipped. "Are you related to Thomas? Is he—" "I'm his brother." Marcus's expression was grim. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Thomas died 3 weeks ago. Fever took him quick." The world seemed to tilt beneath Evangeline's feet. She clutched her carpet bag tighter, her knuckles going white. "Dead? But his letter. I just received it last month." He said, "That letter was written before he got sick." Marcus removed his hat, revealing more of his striking features. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and those piercing green eyes that held more pain than she'd initially noticed. "I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing." Evangeline stared at him, trying to process the information. Dead. Thomas was dead. She'd traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man who no longer existed. Her savings were nearly depleted from the train fare. She had no return ticket, no job waiting for her back in Philadelphia, no family to take her in. I don't know what to do," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Marcus studied her face, taking in her obvious distress. Despite his rough appearance, something in his expression softened. "You got somewhere to go, family back east?" She shook her head, pride warring with desperation. "I used most of my money for the train ticket. I was counting on—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Look, Miss Washington." "Evangeline," she said quietly. "My name is Evangeline. Evangeline." The way he said her name, with that slight rough edge to his voice, made something flutter in her chest despite her shock and grief. "There's a boarding house in town, Mrs. Patterson's place. It's clean and safe. I can see you get settled there while you figure out your next step." She wanted to refuse, to maintain some dignity, but the practical part of her mind was already calculating. She had maybe $20 left, enough for a few weeks' room and board if she was careful. Maybe she could find work, save up enough for passage back east. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Brennan." "Marcus," he said, picking up her carpet bag before she could protest. "Thomas was my brother. Taking care of his intended is the least I can do." As they walked through the dusty streets of Copper Creek, Evangeline snuck glances at the man beside her. Thomas had written about his older brother in his letters, a ranch hand who preferred solitude to company, who'd never married despite being well into his 30s. He'd made Marcus sound almost like a hermit, but the man walking beside her had a commanding presence that drew attention from every person they passed. The boarding house was a 2-story frame building with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Patterson, a plump woman with graying hair and kind eyes, welcomed Evangeline with genuine warmth despite her obvious curiosity about the circumstances. "Room and board is $4 a week," Mrs. Patterson explained as she showed Evangeline to a small but clean room on the second floor. "That includes breakfast and dinner. Lunch is extra if you want it. $4 a week." Evangeline did quick calculations in her head. She could afford maybe a month if she was very careful with her remaining money. "That will be fine," she said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. After Mrs. Patterson left, Evangeline sat on the narrow bed and allowed herself a moment of despair. What had she been thinking, traveling across the country to marry a stranger? She'd been so desperate to escape her circumstances in Philadelphia. The tiny, airless room she'd shared with 2 other seamstresses, the 14-hour workdays, the constant worry about having enough to eat. That Thomas's offer had seemed like a miracle. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Marcus standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands. "I wanted to check that you were settled," he said, "and to give you this." He held out an envelope, worn soft from handling. Her name was written on the front in Thomas's careful script. "He was working on this when he got sick," Marcus explained. "Never finished it, but I thought maybe you'd want to see it." Evangeline took the letter with trembling fingers. "Thank you." Marcus nodded curtly and turned to go, then paused. "Miss Washington, Evangeline, if you need anything while you're figuring out your plans, send word to the Brennan Ranch. It's about 5 miles north of town." "I couldn't impose." "You're not imposing. You're—" He seemed to struggle for words. "Thomas cared about you. That makes you family in a way." After he left, Evangeline carefully opened the unfinished letter. Thomas's handwriting, which she'd come to know so well from their correspondence, filled half a page. "My dear Evangeline, your last letter filled my heart with such joy. I can hardly believe that in just a few weeks you'll be here with me, and we'll finally meet in person. I've been preparing the cabin, making it ready for a lady's touch. Marcus thinks I'm being foolish, fussing over curtains and such, but I want everything to be perfect for you. I must confess, I'm nervous about disappointing you. Your letters paint you as such an accomplished, intelligent woman. I hope when you see me, when you see this rough country and the simple life I can offer, you won't regret your decision to come west. I dream of the day I can call you my wife, when we can build a life together in this beautiful, wild country. I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me." The letter ended there, mid-sentence, as if Thomas had been interrupted. Evangeline pressed the paper to her chest, tears finally coming. She'd lost not just a fiancé, but the dream of the life they might have built together. The next morning brought harsh reality. Evangeline dressed carefully and ventured into town, looking for work. The general store didn't need help. The schoolhouse already had a teacher, the saloon. Well, that wasn't an option for a respectable woman. By the 3rd day, her situation was becoming desperate. She was down to her last few dollars, and Mrs. Patterson, kind as she was, expected payment at the end of the week. She was sitting on the boarding house porch, trying to work up the courage to ask about taking in mending or laundry work, when Marcus Brennan rode up on a magnificent black horse. He dismounted with fluid grace and approached the porch, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Good morning, Mr. Brennan, Marcus." He studied her face, those sharp green eyes missing nothing. "You look like a woman with troubles on her mind." "I'm managing," she said, lifting her chin. "Are you?" He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him. "Because Mrs. Patterson mentioned you've been looking for work. In a town this size, that's not easy to come by. Heat flooded Evangeline's cheeks. Of course he knew. In a small town, everyone knew everyone else's business. "I'll find something," she insisted. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the porch. Finally, he looked back at her. "I have a proposition for you." Her stomach dropped. She'd heard about propositions men made to desperate women. "I'm a respectable woman, Mr. Brennan." His eyebrows shot up, and then, surprisingly, he laughed. A rich, warm sound that transformed his entire face. "Not that kind of proposition, Evangeline, though I can see how you might think otherwise." "Then what?" "I need help at the ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Santos, is getting on in years and the work is getting too much for her. She needs someone to help with the cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. Room, board, and $20 a month." $20 a month was more than she'd made as a seamstress. It was also far more than she'd expected anyone in a small frontier town to offer. "That's very generous," she said carefully. "But I have to ask, why are you offering this to me?" Marcus replaced his hat, the brim casting shadows across his features. "Because Thomas would have wanted me to take care of you, and because I meant what I said about you being family now. I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept charity. It's not charity." His voice carried a slight edge now. "Mrs. Santos genuinely needs help. And you need work. It's a fair arrangement for both parties." Evangeline studied his face, looking for any sign of ulterior motives, but his expression was straightforward, businesslike, and the truth was, she didn't have many options. "When would I start?" "Today, if you're willing. I can have your things collected and drive you out to the ranch." An hour later, Evangeline found herself sitting beside Marcus in his wagon as they drove through the Arizona landscape. The desert was more beautiful than she'd expected, with its dramatic rock formations and unexpected splashes of color from wildflowers and cacti. "Tell me about Mrs. Santos," she said, trying to fill the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "She came to work for us when I was about 12, Marcus replied, his hands steady on the reins. "Her husband died in a mining accident and she needed work. Been like family ever since." "Us?" "My parents owned the ranch then. After they died, Thomas and I inherited it together." His voice tightened slightly. "Now it's just mine. I'm sorry for your loss. Both losses." Marcus glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Thomas was a good man. He would have made you a good husband." "You don't sound entirely convinced." He was quiet for so long that Evangeline thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he said, "Thomas was gentle, kind. He saw the best in everyone, sometimes to his own detriment. This country. It can be hard on gentle souls." "And then you're not gentle?" Another of those long pauses. "No, I'm not." The Brennan ranch was larger and more prosperous than Evangeline had expected. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a red tile roof and a wide veranda that wrapped around 3 sides. Corrals and outbuildings dotted the landscape, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. Mrs. Santos emerged from the house as they pulled up, a small, weathered woman with silver-streaked hair and intelligent dark eyes. She embraced Marcus like a son before turning to study Evangeline. "So you are Thomas's girl," she said in accented English. "I am sorry for your loss, mija. He was a good boy." "Thank you," Evangeline managed, touched by the genuine sympathy in the older woman's voice. "Come, I show you the house," Mrs. Santos continued, taking Evangeline's arm. "Marcus, you bring her things." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, with thick adobe walls that kept out the heat and beautiful handcrafted furniture that spoke of both prosperity and good taste. Mrs. Santos showed her through the main rooms, a large kitchen with a modern stove, a comfortable parlor with built-in bookshelves and several bedrooms. "This was to be your room when you married Thomas," Mrs. Santos said, opening a door to reveal a spacious chamber with windows facing east to catch the morning light. "Marcus, he fixed it up special. New curtains, even bought a ladies' dressing table in town." Evangeline's throat tightened as she looked around the room. She could see Thomas's touches everywhere. The delicate wild flowers in a vase on the windowsill, the soft quilt on the bed in shades of blue and yellow. He wanted everything perfect for you, Mrs. Santos added softly. Perhaps I should stay in a different room, Evangeline said, feeling like an intruder. No, mija. Thomas would want you comfortable. Besides, it's the nicest room in the house. That evening, Evangeline sat on the veranda watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The beauty of the landscape still took her breath away, so different from the grimy streets of Philadelphia. Marcus emerged from the house, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one and settled into the chair beside her, his long legs stretched out in front of him. Beautiful sunset, she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. One of the benefits of living out here. No buildings or smoke to block the view. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors fade from the sky. Finally, Evangeline worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering her all day. Why did Thomas never mention this place in his letters? The ranch is obviously successful, prosperous. He wrote as if he was just a simple cowhand. Marcus sipped his coffee, his profile stark against the twilight. Thomas was modest to a fault. He probably didn't want you to think he was bragging, or that he was trying to attract you with money. Was he trying to attract me with money? No. Marcus's voice was certain. Thomas was many things, but he wasn't calculating like that. He genuinely wanted a companion, someone to share his life with. And you? Have you ever thought about marriage? The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted it when Marcus stiffened slightly. Marriage isn't for everyone, he said after a moment. That's not really an answer. He turned to look at her then, his green eyes unreadable in the gathering darkness. No, it's not, but it's the only one I'm prepared to give. Heat rose in her cheeks. I apologize. That was presumptuous of me. You're curious. It's natural. His voice softened slightly. This is going to be your home for a while. You have a right to know about the people you'll be living with. Home. The word sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. It had been so long since she'd had a real home, a place where she belonged. Over the next few weeks, Evangeline settled into a routine at the ranch. She worked alongside Mrs. Santos, learning to cook for the ranch hands, manage the household accounts, and tend the small garden behind the house. The work was different from her life as a seamstress. More varied, more satisfying in ways she hadn't expected. Marcus was often gone during the day, working with the cattle or riding the range to check on the herds. But in the evenings, he would join her and Mrs. Santos for dinner, and afterward, he and Evangeline would often sit on the veranda, talking about books they'd read, places they'd been, dreams they'd harbored. She learned that he'd been educated back east at a college in Boston, before returning to help run the ranch. He was well-read and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once she got past his initial reserve. She also learned that he carried a deep sense of responsibility for everyone on the ranch, not just Mrs. Santos and the hired hands, but for her as well. You don't have to take care of me, she told him one evening after he'd insisted on having one of the hands repair a loose floorboard in her room. Yes, I do, he replied simply. It's what Thomas would have done. But Thomas isn't here. Marcus's jaw tightened. No, he's not. But I am, and I don't shirk my responsibilities. The conversation left her feeling oddly unsettled. Was that all she was to him? A responsibility inherited from his dead brother? The answer to that question came a few weeks later, when Jake Morrison rode onto the ranch with a group of his men. Morrison owned a smaller spread to the south, and according to Mrs. Santos, he'd been trying to buy out smaller ranchers in the area for years. Evangeline was in the kitchen when she heard voices on the veranda. Marcus's low tones and another man's louder, more aggressive speech. Curiosity got the better of her, and she moved to the window to listen. You're a fool, Brennan, Morrison was saying. This drought's going to kill half your herd, and you know it. I'm offering you a fair price for land that's going to be worthless in 6 months. My answer hasn't changed, Morrison. The ranch isn't for sale. Even without your brother to help you run it? Come on, Marcus. Be practical. You can't manage all this on your own. I'm managing just fine. Are you, or are you just too proud to admit when you're beaten? Evangeline heard the scrape of a chair, as if someone had stood up quickly. I think this conversation is over, Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. Think about it, Brennan. My offer won't stand forever. After Morrison and his men rode away, Evangeline found Marcus standing at the edge of the veranda, his hands gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles were white. Is he right? She asked softly. About the drought? Marcus didn't turn around. We've had dry years before. We'll get through this one too. What if you don't? Now he did turn, his green eyes blazing. Are you suggesting I should sell? I'm asking if you're letting pride make your decisions for you. Pride. He stepped closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. You think this is about pride? Isn't it? This ranch is my family's legacy. It's the only thing Thomas and I ever built together. He stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. You wouldn't understand. Try me. For a moment, she thought he would open up to her, but then his expression shuttered closed again. It's not your concern, Evangeline. You're here to help Mrs. Santos, not to give me advice about running the ranch. His words stung, reminding her once again that she was just an employee, not family, despite what he'd said that first day. She lifted her chin, pride warring with hurt. Of course. I apologize for overstepping. She turned to go back inside, but his voice stopped her. Evangeline, wait. She paused but didn't turn around. I didn't mean, he sighed. This situation with Morrison has me on edge. I shouldn't have taken it out on you. You were right, though. It's not my concern. Maybe it should be. Something in his voice made her turn around. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race. What do you mean? But whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Santos, who emerged from the house with a worried expression. Marcus, two of the hands just rode in. There's been trouble at the north pasture. The moment was broken. Marcus grabbed his hat and headed for the stables, leaving Evangeline standing on the veranda with more questions than answers. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the look in Marcus's eyes, the way he'd said maybe it should be. What had he meant, and why did the thought of it make her pulse quicken? She was still awake when she heard a rider approaching the house. Looking out her window, she saw Marcus dismounting from his horse, his movements heavy with exhaustion. On impulse, she threw on her wrapper and padded barefoot to the kitchen to put on coffee. She had 2 cups ready when he came through the back door, his clothes dusty and his face grim. Thought you might need this, she said, offering him a cup. He accepted it gratefully, his fingers brushing hers as he took the cup. The brief contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. Bad news, she asked, settling into the chair across from him at the kitchen table. Lost about 20 head. Someone cut the fence and drove them off. Morrison? Can't prove it, but who else would it be? Marcus rubbed his forehead tiredly. He's been increasing the pressure for months. First it was just the offer to buy. Then some of my hands started getting better offers to work elsewhere. Now this. What will you do? What can I do? Post more guards, fix the fences, and hope he doesn't escalate further. Evangeline studied his face in the lamplight. Despite his exhaustion, despite the worry lines around his eyes, he was still the most handsome man she'd ever seen. And somewhere along the way, she'd stopped thinking of him as just Thomas's brother. Marcus, she said softly, can I ask you something? He looked up from his coffee. What? Earlier. When you said maybe the ranch should be my concern, what did you mean? His hand stilled on his cup. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. I meant, he said finally, his voice low, that maybe it's time I stopped thinking of you as Thomas's intended. Her heart stopped, and started thinking of me as what? He looked directly at her then, his green eyes intense. As the woman who's been keeping me awake at night, as the woman who makes me want things I have no right to want. The air between them crackled with tension. Evangeline could hardly breathe. Marcus. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I shouldn't have said that. You're here because of Thomas, because he cared about you. I have no right. What if I want you to have the right? The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus went very still. What are you saying, Evangeline? She stood as well, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'm saying that Thomas is gone. I'm saying that I came here to start a new life, and maybe that life doesn't have to look the way I originally planned. You don't know what you're saying. The grief, the shock of everything that's happened. Don't. She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. Don't tell me I don't know my own mind. I'm 24 years old, Marcus. I'm not a child. Then what are you? I'm a woman who's been alone for most of her life. A woman who's learned to be practical about survival. And I'm a woman who's falling in love with a man who thinks he has no right to love her back. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Marcus's breath caught. Evangeline. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Kiss me, Marcus. Please. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then his control snapped, and his mouth came down on hers with a hunger that took her breath away. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his hard chest, as he kissed her like a man dying of thirst who'd finally found water. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. This is wrong, he said, but he didn't let go of her. Why? Because of Thomas. Because I'm not the man he was. I'm harder, more ruthless. I've done things. I don't care what you've done. I care about who you are now, with me. He searched her face as if looking for doubt, for fear. But all he saw was certainty. If we do this, he said quietly, there's no going back. I won't share you, Evangeline. If you're mine completely. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in her belly. I don't want anyone else, she whispered. I want you. This time, when he kissed her, it was slower, deeper, full of promise and possession. When he lifted her into his arms and carried her toward his room, she didn't protest. She'd come west to start a new life. And this felt like the beginning of everything she'd ever truly wanted. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Mrs. Santos took one look at them at breakfast, at the way Marcus's hand lingered on Evangeline's shoulder, at the glow in Evangeline's face, and smiled knowingly. About time, she said simply, and went back to cooking eggs as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Over the following weeks, as Evangeline and Marcus navigated their new relationship, they had to face the practical realities of their situation. The ranch was still under pressure from Morrison. The drought was getting worse, and the townspeople, when they learned about the development, had mixed reactions. Some, like Mrs. Patterson, were supportive. That girl needs a good man to take care of her, she declared to anyone who would listen. And Marcus Brennan is as good as they come. Others were less understanding. Seems mighty convenient, Evangeline overheard one woman say at the general store. Poor Thomas barely cold in the ground, and she's moved on to his brother. The criticism stung, but Marcus's response was swift and decisive. Anyone who has a problem with my personal life is welcome to take it up with me directly, he announced at the next town meeting. But I won't have anyone speaking ill of Miss Washington. She's been through enough. It was Dr. Henderson, the town physician, who suggested a solution that would satisfy both their hearts and the proprieties. Marry her, he told Marcus bluntly one evening when he'd come out to the ranch to check on an injured horse. You love her. She loves you. Make it official and stop giving the gossips ammunition. It's too soon, Marcus protested. Thomas has only been gone 3 months. Thomas would want you both to be happy. You know that. But would she want to marry me? We haven't. I haven't asked. Doctor, Henderson chuckled. Son, that woman looks at you like you hung the moon. Trust me, she'll say yes. The proposal came 2 days later, as they sat on the veranda watching another spectacular sunset. Marcus had been quiet all day, and Evangeline could sense something weighing on his mind. "Evangeline," he said finally, turning to face her, "I have something to ask you." She set down her coffee cup, giving him her full attention. "I know this isn't the romantic proposal you probably dreamed of as a girl, and I know the circumstances of how we met, how we came to care for each other are complicated. Marcus, let me finish." He took her hands in his thumbs stroking over her knuckles. "I love you. I love your strength, your intelligence, your courage in coming out here and building a new life. I love the way you care for Mrs. Santos, the way you've made this house a home again. I love waking up next to you, and I love falling asleep with you in my arms." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I can't promise you an easy life. This country is hard, and there are challenges ahead. Morrison isn't going to give up, and there will always be people who question our story. But I can promise you that I will love you, protect you, and stand by you for as long as I draw breath." He slipped from his chair to one knee, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "Evangeline Washington, will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." The ring slipped onto her finger, as if it had been made for her. When Marcus kissed her, it tasted of tears and joy and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to hope for. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the local church. Mrs. Santos cried through the entire service. Dr. Henderson gave Evangeline away, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her with such tenderness that even the skeptics in the congregation had to admit they looked like two people truly in love. The wedding reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the stars and lanterns strung between the trees. As Evangeline danced with her new husband, she felt a peace she'd never known before. "Any regrets?" Marcus murmured in her ear as they swayed to the music. "Only one," she replied, smiling up at him. His face darkened with concern. "What's that?" "I wish Thomas could have been here to see how happy we are. I think he would have approved." Marcus's expression softened. "I think so too. He always said he just wanted us both to find what we were looking for." "And have we found what we were looking for?" "I found more than I was looking for," Marcus said, spinning her gently. "I found you." As the evening wore on and their guests began to drift away, Evangeline found herself standing at the edge of the veranda, looking out over the land that was now her home. The challenges ahead were real: Morrison's pressure, the drought, the gossip and speculation. But she no longer faced them alone. Marcus appeared beside her, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Brennan." Mrs. Brennan. She loved the sound of it. "I was thinking about how strange life is," she said, leaning back against his solid warmth. 6 months ago, I was a seamstress in Philadelphia, lonely and poor and dreaming of something better. Then I answered an ad from a man I'd never met, traveled across the country to marry him, only to find him gone. Do you wish things had happened differently? She turned in his arms to face him. How can I wish that, when it brought me to you? Even though it means you'll never know what might have been with Thomas. It was a question that had haunted both of them. The ghost of the man who had brought them together but would never be part of their future. I think, Evangeline said carefully, that Thomas and I might have been happy together. He was kind, gentle, good. But what we have, this fire, this passion, this feeling that I'd die if anything happened to you, I don't think I would have felt that with him. How can you be sure? Because I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to feel this way. Like I've been saving all my love for you, even before I knew you existed. Marcus kissed her then, soft and sweet under the Arizona stars. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Evangeline Brennan, more than I ever thought I could love anyone. And I love you, Marcus Brennan. My husband, my heart, my home. As they stood there, holding each other under the vast desert sky, both of them knew that their story was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, joys and sorrows to weather together. But they also knew that what they'd found was worth fighting for. A love that had grown from tragedy, a partnership forged in fire, and a future full of infinite possibilities. The mail-order bride had come to Copper Creek looking for one man, and found another. The one who was truly meant to be hers all along.